The moment I read his text, I stopped breathing. Not because it was cruel, though it was. Not because 200 people were sitting in white chairs, 12 floors below me, fanning themselves with programs printed on cream cardstock with my name on them, though they were. I stopped breathing because the text wasn't sent just to me. Marcus had sent it to the family group chat. The one with my mother, my aunts, his parents, his 3 brothers, my grandmother who was 91 years old and had flown in from Phoenix specifically for this day. I can't do this. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm already at the airport. Please don't call me. 47 people read it before I did. My maid of honor, my best friend since the 4th grade, burst through the bridal suite door still holding her phone, her lipstick half applied, her eyes wide and wet. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me in my dress, holding my bouquet of pale pink ranunculus, and pressed her lips together so hard they went white. How many people have already seen it? I asked. Maya, how many, Danny? She looked at her phone. The little check marks show everyone opened it. So all of them. My grandmother had seen it. My mother had seen it. The man's own parents had seen it, which meant the humiliation had already traveled in 2 directions simultaneously, branching out like cracks in glass. I thought about my mother downstairs in the front row, in the dusty rose dress she'd cried picking out, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite rage. It was more like a floor giving way. My phone started ringing. My mother's name. I couldn't answer it. I set the phone face down on the vanity and looked at myself in the mirror, 29 years old. 4 years with a man I thought I knew. A dress that had taken 7 months to arrive and 6 alterations to fit right. Outside this window, the Chicago skyline shimmered in the July heat, the lake flat and blue in the distance, impossibly beautiful, impossibly indifferent. My phone kept ringing. Danny came to stand behind me and put both hands on my shoulders. Tell me what you need. I need you to tell me this isn't happening. I can't tell you that. I know. I picked up my bouquet from the vanity and squeezed it until the stems dented my palm. I know you can't. From somewhere below, I could hear the murmur of 200 people who had now, all of them, read what I'd read. I could imagine it perfectly, the way the sound of a crowd changes when bad news moves through it, that specific shift from festive noise to something lower and more animal, the sound of people processing someone else's disaster. Some of them were probably relieved it wasn't happening to them. Some of them were already composing the text they'd send later. Some of them, the crueler ones, were already entertained. Danny's phone buzzed, then again. Then 4 times in rapid succession. Your Aunt Carol is asking if she should tell the caterers to hold the food. She paused. Your uncle is asking if anyone has Marcus's car make and model. Of course he is. She stopped. What? Your mother is in the hallway. I heard the knock a second later. 3 sharp raps. Then my mother's voice, low and controlled in the way it only got when she was working very hard not to fall apart. Maya, sweetheart, open the door. I crossed the room and opened it. She was still holding her phone. Her eyes were dry, which meant she'd already moved past crying and into something harder. She was a small woman, my mother, but she had a way of taking up a doorframe that made her seem twice her size. She looked at me for a long moment, then at Danny, then back at me. His mother just called me, she said. She's mortified. She's downstairs trying to explain to his family. His father hasn't said a word to anyone. He's just sitting there. What does his mother want me to do about it? Nothing. I think she just needed to say it to someone. My mother stepped into the room and took my face in both hands. Her rings were cool against my cheeks. What do you want to do? I don't know. We can go downstairs and I'll make an announcement. We'll thank everyone for coming. We'll tell them there's been a change of circumstances, and we'll send them home with a meal because the food is already paid for. I thought about walking back out through those doors, about the way every head would turn, about my grandmother, who had flown in from Phoenix, who had asked me 3 times over the past year whether I was sure about Marcus, and whom I had reassured 3 times with the particular confidence of someone who is wrong. I can't go back out there, I said. You don't have to decide right now. I can't go out there and stand in front of all of them and... A knock at the open door. All 3 of us turned. Dr. Elliot Hayes was standing in the hallway in a dark suit, one hand braced on the doorframe, and he looked like he'd walked up 12 flights of stairs because the elevator had taken too long. His tie was slightly loosened. He was holding his phone in his other hand. He took in the room, me in my dress, Danny with her half-finished lipstick, my mother with her hands still raised from where she'd held my face, and he said nothing for a moment. He was my attending physician when I was a resident. Now, 3 years later, he was the chief of surgery at Mercy General, which technically made him the reason I still had a job after the incident with the Caldwell family last spring, and the reason I'd been promoted to charge nurse on the cardiothoracic floor 6 months ago. We had spoken exactly 4 personal sentences to each other in the time I'd known him. I knew he took his coffee black. I knew he had a younger sister. I knew he ran the lakefront path at 5 in the morning because I had once arrived at the hospital at 5:15 and seen him coming through the lobby still breathing hard. I did not know why he was standing in the doorway of my bridal suite. Dr. Hayes, my voice came out strange, formal, which felt insane given the dress. You didn't need to come up here. I know, he didn't move from the doorframe. His eyes were steady on mine, that look he got in trauma situations, measuring, cataloging, deciding. I was downstairs when the message came through. I saw your face on the way in this morning and He stopped. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm not all right. No, he said. I don't imagine you are. My mother had gone very still beside me in the way she did when she was deciding whether someone was trustworthy. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something passed between them that I wasn't part of. 200 people are sitting in a rooftop garden waiting for something to happen, my mother said. Not to him specifically, not to me specifically, to the room. I know. Dr. Hayes finally stepped fully through the door. He walked to where I was standing and stopped close enough that I could see the small scar on his jaw, the one I'd noticed 100 times across a nurse's station and never once thought about why I'd memorized it. Maya. He said my name like it was a complete sentence. Whatever you need right now, he said, I'll do it. If you need someone to go downstairs and make an announcement, I'll do it. If you need someone to get your grandmother a car to the airport, I'll arrange it. If you need to walk out the back of this building and never look at that room again, I'll walk out with you. He paused. I have my car downstairs. We could just leave. Right now. You don't owe anyone down there an explanation today. My mother made a sound. Not quite a word. Or, he said, and something shifted in his voice, something I couldn't name. If you want to go through with today, not with him, obviously, but with he stopped. I'm aware this is an unusual thing to say. I want to be clear that I'm not saying it lightly. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Danny asked, because Danny had always been better than me at saying the thing out loud. He looked at me, not at her. I have no right to walk in here and say this. I know that. But I've been watching you for 3 years, and I've watched you accommodate that man in ways you never should have had to accommodate anyone. And when I saw that message on my phone downstairs, I felt, he exhaled. I felt something I should have acted on a long time ago. My hands were shaking. I was still holding the bouquet. The stems had left marks on my palm. This is insane, I said. Completely, he agreed. You're my boss. I'm aware. We have never we've talked about patient charts. We talked once about the parking garage situation. You told me I did good work on the Reyes case. You did exceptional work on the Reyes case. And yes, I know what this looks like. I know it looks like I'm taking advantage of a terrible moment. He held my gaze. But I think you know me well enough to know I wouldn't do that. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I want to, and because if I walk back downstairs and send everyone home and you leave and we never say this out loud, I will regret it for the rest of my life. He let a beat pass. But the decision is yours. Entirely yours. Say the word, and I'll go downstairs right now and make the announcement, and we'll never mention this conversation. My mother sat down on the small velvet bench at the vanity. She didn't say anything. She was looking at her hands. Mom, I said. I'm not going to tell you what to do, she said to her hands. You're 29 years old and this is your life. She looked up. But I will tell you that the man who just left you got scared and ran, and the man standing in this room came up 12 flights of stairs. Danny looked at me. I looked at her. She raised her eyebrows exactly the way she'd been raising them at me since we were 9 years old. I turned back to Dr. Hayes. If we do this, I said, you understand what we're walking into. 200 people, a family group chat that already has 47 people watching. His parents are still downstairs. I understand. It won't fix anything. Not really. The whole hospital is going to know by Monday. Yes. And you're not doing this out of I searched for the word. Charity. Something moved across his face. I have never in my life done anything out of charity. Ask anyone who works with me. A pause. Ask your grandmother if you want a second opinion. She's been watching you since you walked in this morning, and she looked at me twice when she saw us speak in the lobby. I think she already knows." I almost laughed. Somehow, that was the thing that almost made me laugh. I looked at my bouquet. I looked at the window and the skyline and the flat blue lake. I thought about 200 chairs and a family group chat, and my grandmother in Phoenix who had asked me 3 times, "Are you sure about this one, Maya? Are you really sure?" I took his hand. His fingers closed around mine before I finished reaching, like he'd been waiting for the movement before it started. "Let's go," I said. The look on people's faces when we walked back out together was something I will never entirely be able to describe. I heard the sound change before I could see any faces that shift from low murmuring to silence, the specific silence of a crowd recalibrating. He walked beside me with his hand at the small of my back, and I held my bouquet and kept my chin level and looked straight ahead at the officiant, who was standing at the flower-covered arch with an expression of profound confusion. In the front row, my mother slipped quietly into her seat. She must have come down the service stairs. My grandmother in the second row caught my eye. She looked at the man walking beside me. She nodded once, very slowly, in the manner of someone whose opinion has just been confirmed. The officiant leaned forward. "We're ready to proceed," Dr. Hayes said, in the voice he used when he was the only calm person in a room and everyone else needed to become calm quickly. "I apologize for the delay." The murmuring surged and broke and settled. I heard Marcus's mother somewhere behind me make a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been something else. I heard my Aunt Carol, seated somewhere to the left, hiss something at the person beside her. I heard my uncle say, "Well, I'll be," in a tone of genuine amazement. The officiant opened his binder. "I do need to verify. I have everything." I still didn't have the word for what he was yet, reached into his jacket and produced his license and a folded document with the ease of someone who had thought this through more carefully than the last 20 minutes. Should have allowed. I realized, with a clarity that came from somewhere calm and deep, that he had kept the license in his jacket because he had been at a wedding and had expected to need to show identification for something. That was all. It didn't have to mean more than that. But it could. The officiant reviewed the documents with the focused energy of a man trying very hard to do his job correctly under extraordinary circumstances. Then he looked at us both. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? This is a legally binding—" "We're certain," I said. My voice was even. I was more surprised by this than anyone. The officiant cleared his throat and began. I remember pieces of it clearly, and pieces not at all. I remember the way the sun was positioned over the lake and how the light hit the flowers on the arch. I remember hearing someone in the back rows crying quietly and not being able to tell if it was sadness or the other thing. I remember looking at the man standing across from me and thinking I had spent 3 years in close proximity to a face and had somehow never actually looked at it. "Do you take this man?" I did. "Do you take this woman?" He did, without any hesitation, without looking away, as if the words were something he'd been waiting to say for a while, and was relieved to finally say them. "I now pronounce you." The applause was not the applause I had imagined when I imagined this day. It was confused and uncertain and a little too loud, the sound of a crowd that didn't know quite what had happened but was responding to the shape of the moment anyway. Someone whooped. Danny was crying openly in the front row. My grandmother was still nodding. He leaned in and pressed his lips to mine, brief and careful, just enough to be real. "Breathe," he murmured against my ear as we turned to face the crowd. "You're doing fine. You keep saying that. You keep proving it." The reception was 3 hours of performance that I do not remember as individual moments but as a continuous sustained effort to appear like a woman who had planned for this. He was better at it than I was. He moved through the room with the same composure. He moved through a hospital floor during a code, steady, calibrated, aware of everything happening in his peripheral vision. He deflected questions I didn't know how to answer. He shook hands with relatives whose names I had to whisper to him between introductions. He spoke to my father for 11 minutes in the corner by the bar, and when my father came back to find me, he said, simply, "He's solid, Maya," which was the highest endorsement in my father's vocabulary. Marcus's parents left after the first hour. I did not watch them go. Someone told me later that his mother had cried and that his father had shaken my father's hand on the way out and said something private that my father never repeated. At some point, I found myself standing near the cake table with Danny, both of us holding champagne, watching my new husband talk to my grandmother. "He's been over there for 20 minutes, Danny said. "I know." She's smiling. She doesn't smile at people she doesn't like. "Maya." Danny turned to face me. Her mascara had migrated somewhat, but she had stopped caring. "How long have you known?" "Known what?" She gave me a look. "I didn't know anything," I said. "I was going to marry Marcus today." "That's not what I asked." I watched him lean down slightly to hear something my grandmother said. He laughed a real laugh, head back, the kind I had heard from him exactly twice before, both times when someone on the floor said something unexpectedly funny during an otherwise terrible shift. My grandmother patted his hand. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I really don't know." The hotel suite was decorated for a wedding night I had imagined entirely differently. Rose petals on the white duvet, champagne in a bucket, the skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago blazing and alive 12 stories below. I sat on the edge of the bed in my dress, which I had been wearing for 7 hours, and looked at the door of the bathroom, which was closed, because he was giving me a moment by getting himself a glass of water from the tap. When he came back out, he had taken off his jacket and his tie. He handed me the second glass of water he'd brought and sat in the armchair across the room, not on the bed, not close, at a careful distance that told me he had thought about where to sit. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I genuinely don't know." I drank the water. "Better than I expected," which feels wrong to say. Why wrong? Because I was supposed to be devastated. I am devastated, but I tried to find the shape of it. It's like being devastated about something you already knew was wrong but couldn't admit to yourself. Like there's grief, but underneath the grief there's also something that feels almost like relief, and then you feel terrible for feeling the relief. He was quiet for a moment. "How long did you know it was wrong?" I looked at my bouquet, which I had set on the nightstand. "Long enough that my grandmother asked me 3 times. My sister asked me once, about someone I was with years ago. I told her she was projecting." "Was she?" "Spectacularly not." A small pause. "She'll be furious with me for not calling her immediately. She lives in Boston. She found out through an Instagram story that apparently someone at the reception posted." I covered my face with one hand. "Oh no. She'll be fine. She's going to love you." He said it simply, as a fact rather than a reassurance. She already texted me a string of approximately 30 emojis. I laughed, which surprised me. The laugh felt disloyal to the weight of the day and then immediately stopped feeling disloyal, because the weight of the day had been exhausting and I was so tired of performing under it. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes. You said you've been watching me for 3 years. I kept my eyes on the bouquet. What does that mean exactly? Because I want to understand what happened today and I can't understand it without knowing that." He didn't answer immediately. I heard him set down his glass. "It means," he said carefully, "that I noticed you, the way you work, the way you talk to patients who are scared, the way you don't change how you treat people depending on their position or their prognosis, the way you pushed back on Dr. Morrison last fall about the Hendricks protocol when everyone else in that room let it go, and you were right, and you knew you were right, and you said so. A beat. And it means I noticed Marcus. How you talked about him. How you were at the hospital Christmas party, the way you seemed smaller than you are, like you'd adjusted yourself down to a size he could stand next to comfortably." The word smaller landed somewhere specific. "He didn't like that I made more than him," I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud to anyone. He said it didn't bother him, but it did. He'd make these little comments. Nothing you could ever point to and call a problem. I stopped. Just enough. Just enough to make me second-guess everything. I finally looked up. I almost turned down the charge nurse promotion. "Did you know that?" I almost said no because I knew how he'd react and I thought it wasn't worth the conversation. "What changed your mind?" My grandmother called me the night before I had to give my answer. He smiled. She knew then, too. She's been right about everything for 91 years. You'd think I'd stop being surprised. The room was quiet for a moment, but it was a different kind of quiet than the silence in the bridal suite had been. That silence had been the sound of a situation without a solution. This one was softer, more open. "I need to ask you something now," he said. "Okay. This morning, before everything happened, and you don't have to answer this, you can tell me it's none of my business, but were you happy? Not was the relationship perfect. Were you happy?" I thought about the morning. I had woken up at 5:30, before my alarm, and lain in the dark in the hotel room listening to Danny breathe in the other bed. I had stared at the ceiling and felt not joy. Not the feeling I had assumed I was supposed to feel. A kind of determination, the feeling of someone about to complete a task they had committed to. "No," I said, "I don't think I was." "Okay," he nodded slowly. Then here's what I want to say. I know today was chaotic, and I know I made a decision on your behalf that you had seconds to agree to, and I know there's an enormous amount we don't know about each other. But I did not do what I did today out of impulse alone. I've been thinking about you for a long time. He looked at the window. I never found the right way to act on it. There didn't seem to be a right way. You were in a relationship, and I was your supervisor, and saying something felt like it would make everything complicated and unfair to you. And today seemed like a better option? I said, but I was almost smiling. Today seemed like the only option that was honest. I looked at him across the room, in the low lamplight, with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his glass of water, and the quiet, careful distance he had maintained since we came upstairs, and I thought about all the times I had seen him in a hallway and not fully registered what I was seeing. Navy blue, he said suddenly. I blinked. What? You're about to ask me things you don't know about me. Get ahead of it. He leaned back in the chair. Navy blue is my favorite color. I have a sister in Boston and my parents are in Seattle and I call them every Sunday, which my sister thinks is excessive and my mother thinks is insufficient. I run because I can't turn my brain off any other way. I've read the same book, The Remains of the Day, 4 times, which my sister also has opinions about, and I can cook exactly 3 things well. My grandmother's pasta, scrambled eggs, and one specific soup that nobody I have ever made it for has been able to identify the origin of. I sat with this for a moment. I hate the cold, I said, which is a problem given where we live. My mother says I should have been born somewhere else. I've worked in hospitals since I was 19 because my brother had a bad experience with a careless nurse when he was 13, and I decided then I was going to be the opposite of that. I've seen When Harry Met Sally more times than I can count, and I'm not embarrassed about it, and I have never, not once in my adult life, made a decision this fast. I know. I'm still terrified. Suungi, are you? He looked at me steadily. I just married a woman I've never had a meal with, in front of her entire family, on what was supposed to be her wedding to someone else. Yes. I'm terrified. Something shifted in the room, some quality of the air. He stood from the armchair and crossed to where I was sitting on the edge of the bed. He didn't sit down next to me. He crouched in front of me so that we were at eye level, his forearms resting on his knees. Here's what I want, he said. I want to take this slowly. I want to have dinners and arguments about things that don't matter, and figure out what we're actually like together outside of a hospital and a wedding disaster. I want to learn what makes you laugh when nothing is performing at you. I want you to meet my sister, who is going to ask you approximately 40 questions in the first 10 minutes, and mean every one of them as a compliment. And I want to give you time to grieve whatever you're grieving, because you're allowed to grieve it, even if it was wrong, even if you already knew without feeling like you owe me some particular feeling on any particular timeline. My throat was tight. That's a very measured speech. I've had a few hours. In between getting married. In between getting married, he confirmed. I reached out and put my hand over one of his. His hand turned over under mine, slowly, and held it. You said something, I said, upstairs in the suite, before we went down. You said you felt something you should have acted on a long time ago. I did say that. What does that mean? Specifically. He was quiet for long enough that I felt the silence as a physical weight. Then, it means that for a year and a half I have been looking for reasons to walk past the cardiothoracic floor when I had no clinical reason to be there. It means your name in a staff meeting makes me pay slightly more attention. It means I sat in a ceremony today watching watching you prepare to marry someone who didn't see you, and I felt something I cannot describe as anything other than loss. A preemptive loss. Like watching a door close. He paused, and then the door opened back up, in the most disorienting possible way. I thought about the past 4 years, about all the small diminishments I had called normal, about all the things I had told myself were manageable, adjustable, fine, about lying awake in a hotel room at 5:30 on what was supposed to be the happiest morning of my life, feeling nothing that resembled joy, about a man going out of his way to walk past a hospital floor. I want to try, I said. Yeah? Slowly. Like you said, with dinners and arguments and meeting your sister who is going to ask 40 questions. She'll ask more than 40. I know. I looked at our hands, but I want to try, because the person who left this morning I think I knew for a while that he was going to leave. Not like this, not exactly like this, but I knew something was wrong and I kept walking toward it anyway because I didn't know how to stop. And I don't want to be that person again. The person who keeps walking toward the wrong thing because stopping is too scary. Stopping is always scariest right before you do it. Is that from the book you've read 4 times? It might be, actually. I laughed for the second time that night. He smiled, a slow, real smile I had seen from him perhaps twice in 3 years and had never let myself dwell on. He stood and returned to the armchair, and we sat in the lamplight for another hour, talking about nothing and everything: his grandmother's pasta recipe, my brother's baseball obsession, the specific bureaucratic nightmare of hospital parking, the question of whether Chicago winters were survivable or merely endured, and the conversation moved easily, the way conversations move when 2 people have been in each other's orbit long enough that the initial awkwardness has already been worn away without either of them noticing. At some point, I realized I was no longer holding the bouquet. At some point, the skyline outside shifted from blazing to glittering. At some point, I stopped feeling like I was performing and just felt present. Marcus called at 7 the next morning. I was awake. I had been awake since 6, sitting by the window with coffee the hotel had sent up, watching the lake turn from gray to silver to blue. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. The 3rd time, I answered, because my father had taught me that the 3rd time means you should decide whether you're going to have the conversation rather than just postpone it. Maya. His voice was rough in the way voices are rough after a night of hard decisions. I need you to know that I'm... Marcus. He stopped. Don't apologize to me right now, I said. Not because I don't think you're sorry. I think you are. But I'm not in a place today where I can hold your apology for you. So I'm going to ask you to call someone else with it. A long silence. I made a mistake, he said. I got scared, and I made the worst decision of my life, and I know that. But if you would just talk to me. I'm talking to you right now. I kept my voice even. It was easier than I expected, and what I'm telling you is that it's done. What you did yesterday, the way you did it, I will not be able to look at you and not see those 47 people reading your message, and I need to not see that every day for the rest of my life. You married someone else. In 1 day. How is that? I did, I said, and I'm not going to explain it to you, because I don't owe you an explanation for what I did after you left. I paused. I hope you're all right, Marcus. I genuinely do. But this is the end of this conversation, and probably the last one we have for a very long time. I hung up. I sat with the phone in my lap and the coffee going cold in my other hand and looked at the lake, which was doing what the lake always does, just existing, massive and unhurried and entirely unconcerned with what was happening in the hotel room 12 stories above it. The bathroom door opened behind me, and my husband came out in yesterday's shirt with his hair unstyled, squinting slightly at the morning light in the way of a man who had slept badly on a hotel pull-out sofa because he had insisted and I had let him, because it was the right call for a day that had already been overwhelming enough. He looked at me. At the phone in my lap. Was that him? Yes. He came and stood near the window, looking out at the lake beside me, not asking, giving me the room to say it or not say it. I'm okay, I said. I know. He looked at the water. Your grandmother texted me this morning. I turned. She has your number? She asked for it last night. I gave it to her. Obviously you don't tell that woman no. He held out his phone. There was a single text from a contact he had saved as Grandma Rose, with an efficiency that made me feel something warm and complicated. The text read, "She didn't cry this morning when she talked to me. She will later, and that's fine. Take care of her when she does. She doesn't ask for it, so you'll have to offer." Rose. I read it twice. She's never wrong about anything, I said. I know. He set the phone down. I already wrote back. What did you say? I said I'd figure it out. He looked at me. And I will. Outside, the lake was wide and silver and the city was waking up. My phone had 17 unread messages and 2 missed calls from my mother and 1 from Danny and 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my husband's sister in Boston, who had apparently found my number through a method she later described only as I have my ways, and whose voicemail said, in a voice that sounded remarkably like his but warmer, "Hi, this is probably insane. You don't know me, but I know who you are. And I just want you to know that my brother is actually the best person I know, even if he has terrible taste in novels. And I'm on your side, and please come to Boston so I can feed you. Okay, bye." I played it twice. Then I looked at the man standing by the window with yesterday's shirt and morning light eyes, who had walked up 12 flights of stairs when everyone else had looked the other way, and I thought, the people who stay are always strangers, until one day they aren't. Your sister said you have terrible taste in novels, I said. She's wrong. She's wrong about almost nothing, but she's wrong about that. She wants us to come to Boston. We will." He said it the way he said things he meant, flat and simple, with no performance around it. "We'll go whenever you want." I set down my cold coffee and looked out at the lake and felt, for the first time in a long while, like I was standing in a place I had actually chosen. That was where it started. Not with a plan or a promise I'd had time to rehearse, but with a man walking through an open door and a woman who finally decided she was done walking toward the wrong things. We had dinners, we had arguments about small things and talked through the large ones. I met his sister in Boston on a Tuesday in October, and she did ask 41 questions, and I answered all of them. And somewhere around question 36, she stopped asking and started talking to me the way you talk to someone who is already family. I cried exactly once about Marcus. On a night in September when I was exhausted, and the grief of the version of the future I had expected came through the way grief does sideways, at an inconvenient time, and he sat with me on the couch and didn't try to fix it and didn't try to talk me out of it, just sat there until it passed, which is the thing that matters most and that I had never once had before. I took the charge nurse promotion. I stopped adjusting myself down to a size that fit someone else's comfort. My grandmother came to visit in November. She sat at our kitchen table and had coffee and talked to him for 2 hours while I pretended to read in the other room and actually listened to every word. Before she left, she took my face in both hands the way my mother had in the bridal suite, and she said, "You see? You just needed to stop walking toward the wrong door." She was right. She's always right. She's been right for 91 years, and I have finally stopped being surprised by it.